Let's go to the Constitution Hill now, where our reporter Canny Maphanga is standing by to help us continue to unpack this further. Canny, thank you so much for your time. Now, of course, the long delays in dealing with some of the complaints against judges, particularly the most recent ones of Judge President John Hlophe and Judge Nkola Motata, have shown, as some experts have been saying, that there are major challenges as it relates to holding judges accountable for misconduct of any kind. I mean, you've been speaking to legal experts. Just talk to us about what they are saying currently, just about the state of South Africa's judicial system.
Well, good afternoon to you, Anati, and to the viewers at home. I'm currently at the doorstep of the Constitutional Court, the highest court in the land, to unpack this question that has been posed of whether there is a crisis in the judiciary or if we're seeing a new era of accountability for judges. Now, as I've stated earlier, judges are appointed in terms of the Constitution to the superior courts of the country. And while they are humans that can be fallible and make mistakes, unfortunately, a judicial career of this kind requires that there is a moral upstanding, that you uphold the integrity of the judiciary and ensure that people still believe in this institution, because that upholds, or rather strengthens, the rule of law in the country. So we have instances where judges, quote unquote, misbehave. The mechanisms that are in place to deal with that need to be efficient and fit for purpose. Now, what we have seen in the country over a number of years, at least over a decade in some of the complaints that we're seeing, is that the complaints aren't a new phenomenon, but rather the JSC and the legislation that governs the disciplining of judges is where they detect those flaws. As you've seen with a number of these tribunals, specifically the tribunal that looked at the case of Judge Motata, that tribunal came to the conclusion that he should be found guilty of gross misconduct. Now, when it was referred back to the JSC to exercise their mandate in terms of the legislation, they came to a different finding and didn't accept it, and I guess reduced the finding to misconduct. Now, in that instance, that is how this matter was delayed, and accountability only came once Freedom Under Law took the JSC to court, and that is the SCA that eventually upheld that they didn't make the correct finding, and in fact the flaws, rather, it was quite an indictment on the JSC, that ruling. The flaws were in the JSC itself and its failure to exercise its mandate.
Now, Canny, of course, you are, just alluding to some of those complaints then that have been leveled against the Judicial Service Commission in terms of how their processes work, some finding it also not being as consistent and as hard-hitting as it should be. So we know, of course, that these processes may then lead to some sanctions being delivered to a particular judge when found guilty. Just talk to us about when the president of the country then becomes involved.
Well, the JSC process itself, and which is why a lot of advocacy groups are calling for the amendments, is quite tricky and rigorous itself. Remember, when the complaint is first made to the JSC must then assess if it is of a serious nature. If it is of a serious nature, they then refer it to the Judicial Conduct Committee, which will then assess and evaluate the complaint as a whole. The JCC then makes a recommendation to the JSC whether the complaint itself needs further investigation. That is when the Judicial Conduct Tribunal comes in. That is a body of three, that is 2 judges, usually retired judges, and then a member of the legal fraternity, then assess the investigations. It's an inquiry, it's not a court of law, and then makes its report to the JSC. The JSC will then make a decision. If the JSC finds that the judge is guilty of gross misconduct, they can then refer the matter to Parliament, and then Parliament takes over in its process, which then includes the impeachment vote, which you saw with the former Western Cape Judge President John Hlophe and now the impeached retired Judge Mutata, who were removed from office through that 2/3 majority vote. Now, where the president comes in is that it's more of a formality. He doesn't really have discretion in that resolution once it's made by the National Assembly. He just must carry it out according to the Constitution. Now, because he is the appointing authority when he appoints judges, of course, when that process is finalized, he then has to inform those same judges of their removal from office.
Canny, thank you so much for unpacking that for us. Let's leave it there for now. Thank you so much, Canny Maphanga, of course, at the doorstep of the Constitution at Constitution Hill there, just unpacking a very crucial debate that is currently unfolding, whether or not the Judicial Conduct Tribunals that we are seeing are essentially questioning the credibility as well as if the judiciary is in fact in some form of a crisis.